All right. So welcome everyone to i4J's 7th interactive video presentation and Q&A session with Jeff Hoffman. So Jeff's topic today is, can innovation be taught? And there's no better person to, in my opinion, to ask this question to. Jeff was co-founder of Priceline. Were you co-founder of Expedia as well?
No, we built it under a contract agreement with them. So we were their partner, but we actually built it for Microsoft.
So I'd say that's good enough. So Jeff's done, and I won't go into depth on all the different things he's done, but I'll let him explain it. So Jeff's topic is, can innovation be taught? And that's really, really cool to me. And it is because, give you a little quick background. My name is Ben Baldwin, and I'm hosting this series for Vince Cerf and David Nordfors and their excellent think tank group, i4J. This isn't my day job. I'm actually the founder of a company named Scale Driver, and we do innovation consulting. Though instead of consultants, we match executives with real innovators within a process that predicts innovation and accelerates it. So obviously, I love topics like Jeff's. So today we're using live video because it's a great way to introduce ourselves to the group, to share what we're working on in an informal way, and maybe even ask for help, actually. So the video technology as well allows everybody to interact in real time. So you're a very enthusiastic bunch. I started by putting you all on mute. And all I do is request that if you have a question, please introduce yourself to Jeff and to the audience so that he and the audience know who you are. And then you can use, as an alternative, the chat feature on the right side of your screens to get in touch with the group or just with me. And this is an interactive video, so it's an open link, so some people may join who are not members of i4J. So finally, we're recording the session, so figured I'd let you know. And with that, I think we're done, so I'll turn it over to Jeff.
Thank you very much, Ben, and thanks to whoever has joined us and listened. I'll talk for a few minutes about the topic, and then we'll just open it up for some great group discussion. That's the wonderful part, Ben, of this particular group, is it's such an engaging and interactive group, and I got some questions for you guys too. Again, by way of background, just very quickly, I'm a longtime serial entrepreneur. I've been building companies really since I was early 20s, and in different industries. We did a lot of tech, we did a lot of consumer, but for example, last year, we started a music company as an example, and last year, one of our projects, an album we produced, won a Grammy. Excuse me. I am going to apologize now. I'm battling a little bit of I think a cold. I hope it's just allergies. In a really bad week, because last week I had to give a talk on global entrepreneurship at the United Nations, and then I went to the White House. We launched the National Week of Making, so I've been speaking for like 5 days straight with no voice. My apologies. So let me tell you what led me to this thought about innovation. I was watching long ago, you guys probably remember this commercial. It was an IBM commercial. And this guy comes back to his office after lunch, and he's walking down the hall, and he can't find anybody. And when he gets to the end of the hall, everybody's in the conference room with the lights off, and they're laying on mats on the floor like we did in kindergarten. And he says, "What are you guys doing?" And they say, "Innovating." And he said, "How does this work?" And the woman says, "Well, we all just lay here and hope that a good idea comes to somebody." And he says, "How is this going to make us more profitable?" And there's a long pause. And the woman says, "Well, we haven't innovated that yet." And it struck me that most people's definition of innovation is an idea hits me in the shower or on the toilet or on the way to work. It's a random occurrence that a good idea pops up somewhere. So with that context in mind, one day I was on the phone with a friend of mine who's an athlete, and sorry, Ben, I have to give this plug, but since I'm from that area as well, I've been working on a youth scholarship program with LeBron James, and that's who I was talking to. And the other reason I lost my voice this week was LeBron in Cleveland winning big. Especially I'm sitting at Stanford University right now in enemy territory with the Warriors. But so here's what happened. We're talking, and LeBron says, "Jeff, I got to go to practice." And that caused me to think something. I actually said sarcastically, jokingly, I said, "Yeah, me too." And he said, well, you don't practice. And I said, well, I started thinking about it. He said, you're a business guy. Business people don't practice. And I started thinking, wait a minute, LeBron or any professional athlete, they're already the best in the world. So why do they go to practice every day? So if the world's best athletes or the world's best anybody in their field practices every day, when I hung up from him, I started thinking, do I practice? Do we practice? Do we do drills and exercises to increase our odds of winning? And I started thinking about that a lot and investigating it. And the truth is, yes, what I discovered was the most innovative people in the world don't just hope an idea comes along. They actually have drills and exercises they do for practice. So I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to share one of mine that I do because I'd love to get this discussion going about it. If I have time, I might hit on two of them. But let me tell you the first one. I started noticing that our job as innovators, especially entrepreneurs, is that we are idea harvesters, right? We plant seeds, we nurture them any way we can, water them and feed them and hope some of them grow, and adjust conditions as needed. But you got to plant a lot of seeds to try to harvest any one good idea that might actually work. So if it's a numbers game, we got to keep the idea flow going. So I started to think in the terms of exercises I could do to increase the odds that my idea flow would take me to a higher level than if I just waited for ideas to come along accidentally. So I created this technique. And for lack of a name, I just call it info sponging. Doesn't mean anything. It's just the term that I use. But it's like practice. In the same way that an athlete gets up and goes to practice and takes shots in the morning, here's what I do. It's become my daily routine. Every single morning, again, I'm trying to perfect my businesses and innovation skills and increase my odds of winning, just like an athlete. So here's what I do. Every single morning, for the first 10 minutes of the day, I do info sponging. What that means is I do not, for 10 minutes, I do not answer emails, text, phone calls, or anything. And for 10 minutes, I am not in my industry or at my company at all. Leave your company, leave your industry for just 10 minutes. If you can't do it 10 minutes a day, do it once a week. And here's what I do during that 10-minute practice drill. During that time, my goal is to learn one new thing every single day that I have no reason to learn, no need to know, and no idea why I'm learning it. And here's the point of doing that innovation typically comes not because necessarily that you thought of something that no one's ever thought of, but more likely that you've synthesized different bits of knowledge from great ideas that other people had into some new application of those ideas. So I'm going to give you a real example of that to make it a little clearer. In this info sponge, every single day, and the reason that you leave your industry, by the way, is because part of the problem we have is that we get so swallowed up in our own industry that we fail to see the series of ideas and innovations happening in the world around us that we could be the first in our industry to apply. Example, if you work in healthcare, and every day you focus on healthcare problems, you read healthcare stories, you go to healthcare conferences. If I asked you one day if you want to go with me to the banking industry conference, you would say, Jeff, I do healthcare. I don't really care what they do in banking. If I gave you a magazine called Retail Malls Illustrated, you would say, Jeff, we don't run malls. We do healthcare. No thanks. And therein lies the missed opportunity. What I noticed about the all-star innovators, to stick to my sports analogy, is that they are constantly collecting data points from a much broader funnel around them and then trying to see if they can synthesize those into some new idea in their problem domain. So here's what I do in info sponging. During those 10 minutes, I just follow my curiosity. Go to any website you want or physical and on a plane. I buy magazines that I have never read before and may never read again. I do that on purpose. The challenge is every day I learn one new thing. I read an article about something in some completely non-related industry that I don't know why I'm reading. At the end of that 10 minutes, I write down one sentence, what I learned, and I'll end this in a minute with an actual example. I write down what I learned. I stare at it. Most days I look at it and I shrug and I say, okay, interesting, no idea what that means right now. But if you consider every piece of new knowledge you acquire, even seemingly irrelevant knowledge, as a piece of a puzzle. If I gave Ben a piece of a puzzle and said, Ben, what is this puzzle? He would say, Jeff, you gave me one piece. I have no idea. It's blue. If I gave him 2 or 3 pieces, Ben could still not tell me what this puzzle is. But if Ben collected a new puzzle piece every day and conscientiously moved the puzzle pieces around the table just for 10 minutes, a few different ways, and stared at them, one day my phone would ring. Ben would call me all excited and say, Jeff, I just figured it out. This puzzle is about to be a castle in Ireland. So that was the goal with knowledge. I thought, what if my drill, my exercise every day is to learn one new thing every day, load it into my mind, and then let it float around with the other puzzle pieces. But I write that down, the one lesson that I learned from each thing, and I do them on little sticky notes, and I literally move them around the desk to see if a pattern forms in the data. So let me make this concrete with a real example. One day, I was reading a story. This was my info sponge for the day. I follow my curiosity, whatever catches my eye. I don't think about it. So the story was on distressed inventory. I didn't really even know what distressed inventory was. I read a story. I don't sell it. I don't even know it. It wasn't relevant to my industry then. That's the whole point. I learned something new. The puzzle piece I collected, I wrote down at the end, and the story told me that distressed inventory requires a shielded pricing channel, because if I have 100 products and I sell 90 at full price and I have 10 left over and I just want to get rid of them, if I sell them cheap to unload them, I will damage my entire pricing chain, because my platinum customer will be furious that I gave a random customer the last 10 products for half the price he pays. So what does that mean? I don't know. But I info sponged. I wrote down distressed inventory requires shielded pricing channels. I didn't know what it meant, but I went to bed that night. And while I was ruminating about that, I remember thinking about an info sponge I did a few weeks before. The info sponge I did that day was I clicked on a news story on ABC News. And the news story said, every day, 600,000 airplane seats fly around the United States empty. And when I went to bed, I thought, do these 2 puzzle pieces connect? Did I just snap 2 pieces together? Are 600,000 airplane seats relevant distressed inventory? Don't know. Went to bed that night thinking about it. A few weeks later, I was info sponging. My info sponge that morning was I read a story about perishable commodities. Now, the story was about how to sell fruit. Needless to say, I don't sell fruit, and I wasn't planning on selling fruit. Okay, but the whole goal of info sponging, of going to practice every day, is to task myself with some exercise that increases my ability in some way, the same way as a baseball player takes batting practice. So I read this story on perishable commodities. Here's what I learned. No idea why I'm reading this, guys, but what I learned was the story said that it was about selling bananas. That a banana, you have 1 week to sell it. And what the story told you is, as the banana turns more brown, you have to increase the urgency of your marketing and decrease the price. So as it gets browner, you put it in front of the green bananas and you lower the price, because by the end of the week you can't sell it. So I wrote down perishable commodities require a flexible and urgent marketing and pricing system. No idea what that means, okay? But I went to bed that night and I remembered thinking something. Here's what I remembered thinking. What is more perishable than a banana, right? And I'll tell you what came to my mind, because my other puzzle pieces, my other info sponging, I thought, hey, I know something more perishable than a banana. It's an airplane seat. A banana lasts all week, but all the airplane seats perish as soon as you close the door. So you can already see where this is going. Each of these pieces stimulated my thinking on something I never would have thought before. I was connecting dots by assembling puzzle pieces. I'll give you one third one, and then I'll give you the punchline. The third one day I read a story about yield revenue systems and dynamic pricing. Don't know what those mean, don't know why I was reading it. But what it talked about was that if you assess inventory in real time and adjust prices in real time, you have a yield efficiency that fixed pricing will never achieve. So I then started wondering, well, how do they sell airplane seats? This thing I've been pondering now and reading about real-time yield management systems in the airline industry. So again, the punchline is I can take you forward to a day that I was sitting in Connecticut with Jay Walker, whose original IP started our company, pushing these pieces around on the table and realizing one day that we could create a dynamically priced, perishable commodity, distressed inventory distribution system. That thing we created out of all those ideas was Priceline.com. That's an idea that, I know it sounds silly today, but Priceline has a market cap of about $67 billion, does business in 200 countries. And I venture to say that it would not have existed if all we did was look at the travel industry all day. And it's because we created an exercise to constantly, it's a drill that we do for our minds, this info sponging, that enabled us to look at a broad range of bits of knowledge from the whole rest of the world and then try to synthesize those into something new in our domain, in our industry, in this case, travel. I think that's the only reason we ever came across this opportunity. So, excuse me, Ben, I want to mention one other exercise, because our premise here is, can innovation be taught? And my response is that, like athletes, we can practice innovation skills and get better at it. So info sponging was my one example, the technique that I created anyway to increase my chances of being better at what I do. But I'm just going to tell you one more. In this same process, I started to wonder, how do people innovate within their industry? And here's what I realized. The way they innovate within their industry is by staring at their industry and their products. If you've been in healthcare 20 years and someone says, how do we make it better? You'll look at healthcare and you'll create Healthcare 21.0. Healthcare 21.0 will drag along every old paradigm and every bad decision you've ever made, all the legacy. And so let me give you a clear example of that method of doing it. This is a true story. There was a guy in the fast food business years ago, and the fast food chain owner said, we don't seem to be growing in any exponential rate. We're not doing anything different than our competitors. Let's innovate. So the team went inside and they looked at the French fry machine and they said, well, you can't make fries any faster because you can't heat grease any hotter. Then they looked at the Diet Coke machine and they said, well, you can't fill Cokes any faster because they splatter. And they said, we're not sure how to innovate anything more in this industry. One guy, this is a true story, one guy said, you know what, I'm going to leave for the day. He said, I'm going to go out and see what banks are doing. And his teammates said, banks don't serve food, you're wasting your time. And at the first 3 banks he went to, he didn't really learn anything. But at the 4th bank, when he pulled up, by leaving his domain and his industry and tasking his mind to collect data elsewhere, he couldn't park at this bank because there were a bunch of pickup trucks, piles of wood, hammer, nails, and carpenters. And he said to these guys, what are you doing? And they said, oh, we came up with a really cool idea. We're building it. And he said, what is it called? And the guy said, again, a true story, when we finish it, we're going to call it the drive-through window. So this guy zoomed back to his fast food place. The first drive-through window in fast food industry did not come from anyone in the entire industry. It came from a guy seeing a brilliant idea that a bank was doing, implementing it, and later that fast food chain was acquired by McDonald's for its innovation of the drive-through window. So looking only at your industry the way it is today is not the best way to innovate. So let me just share one more quick technique, and we just call these things blue sky sessions, but I'll challenge you to do this. Probably twice a year, I gather my team, and I do this with companies around the world, and I ask them this question, not how can you make your existing company better, because that's, French fries 21.0. What I ask them is this, forget everything you know, there's no gravity, suspend reality for a minute, and answer this question. If you were starting your company over from scratch today, and there was no gravity, meaning you could free think anything you want, how would you build this company from scratch again today? The intellectual exercise of starting your own company over from scratch today yields amazing results because you make suggestions that you don't make in your existing business because you know all the legacy and you know the limitations. So when we do these blue sky things, we were doing the fast food industry, I just told you, and one of my guys said, he goes, Jeff, this is the no gravity part. He said, Jeff, you know those cannons where they shoot t-shirts at people at concerts? I said, yeah. He said, here's what I'm going to do. He said, I'm not going to drive into the drive-through lane at McDonald's anymore. I'm not going to stop at the little window and place an order and pull up and wait for my food and pay. He said, this is the blue sky version. He said, if there was no gravity and I was inventing fast food delivery today, he said, I would be driving down the road. I would text my order to McDonald's. He said, I would open my window without stopping the car, and McDonald's employees would be standing on the side of the road with lunch cannons. He said they would fire the lunch into the open passenger seat using a cannon that they shoot t-shirts out of. Now, we all know that can't be done, but with that starting point, instead of staring at a French fry machine, I'll tell you what happened. We said, let's start there and step down instead of starting at 20 years of inefficiency and stepping up. And when we started with the idea of lunch cannons and drive-thrus, we wound up with an idea for an eyeball in the drive-through lane that's watching cars, checking license plates, checking habits, order history, and seeing that you're leaving the road, pulling into McDonald's, preparing your order, and charging your credit card so you never even have to stop your car. There's a hand hanging out the window holding a bag that's already ready to go because we knew who you were as you started driving by. So I won't get into the details of that, but the whole goal there of tasking yourself intellectually to reinvent your business today and doing that at least annually is another intellectual exercise that's kind of our form of teaching ourselves to be more innovative instead of just hoping that it comes along while we're in the shower one day. So I will stop there. I would love to get some discussion on, can innovation be taught? Can we develop drills and exercises and practice our skills the way athletes do and be better at innovation than typically people are today? Thanks, Ben.
That's awesome. Thanks, Jeff. I have a couple of selfish questions at first. We've had some people sort of log in and log out. But if you have a question, I'll just remind everybody, you'll just need to unmute yourself, introduce yourself to Jeff and to everybody. We have a bunch of people who aren't visible on the screen, so there may be a bunch of people trying to talk at once. So just unmute yourself first, introduce yourself as a first step. But first question, just for me, selfishly, Jeff, what is your definition of innovation? Like, how would you define it?
You know, I think that typically what people think of innovation is you got to think of some new idea that no one's ever thought of before, which is great. By the way, anytime you have one of those, go for it. That's really good. But I think my definition, again, is the ability to combine and synthesize great ideas that other people had elsewhere into some new application of those where it's never been done before. So again, the really, really simple version was a guy spotting a drive-through window in a bank and saying, wait a minute, I could use that in my industry. But the more complicated version of that is just looking at business models, looking at trends. I'll give you another example. I go, even though I don't use it for anything else, I go on the homepage of Yahoo once a day, and I glance at the top to see the top 10 trending searches every day. I don't know what I'm looking for. But if you do that every day, you start to get an ebb and a flow of what people in the world are worrying about based on what they're researching. So I look at it every day, and over time, I start to get patterns that form in the data of what it is people are thinking about, that if I didn't do this daily and I didn't swim in that river, I probably would not have some sets of ideas, things that occur to me that wouldn't otherwise. So my definition of innovation is the ability to synthesize new applications of frequently existing ideas in a way that no one's ever thought of applying them before.
Very interesting. And just as a quick follow-up question, what's the success rate in general of innovation, and kind of what's yours, which kind of brings us back to that definition of innovation? Like what would you say the going success rate is? And then with this practice, how what's your success rate? And if I'm a corporate person, how do I measure innovation? Like if I work at a big company, how do I explain to other people what it is that I'm doing other than just taking a shot in the dark and, this is the average number of shots I have to take before I hit something. So
I think you hit on an absolutely important question that I hope this discussions group can continue to discuss over time, because I looked all over to see if that existed, and there's just not much. What is the metric system for innovation? We need to get better metrics. You said some basic ones. I'm telling you now, I don't have a good answer, and I really want one. I hope that we as an intellectual team can come up with that. But, the number of ideas generated, the number of them that actually turned into product, the number of those products that had impact, whether that's revenue or social impact, the number of people on your team that have ever suggested anything is an important metric. If you have one person that is always suggesting ideas and the whole rest of your team never speaks up, that's not that's not great productivity. So I don't know the answer, but I think it's an important discussion to have. How do we measure? Things that we measure are the ones that tend to get better. We all know that. So if we have no real metrics for innovation, then we're probably not improving our odds very much. And I think it's really important. I will say that there are some role models, and not the ones you expect. People expect Google or Apple or whatever. But I'll give you one that I was really impressed with, Whirlpool. They make appliances and washers and dryers. But Whirlpool has this really cool thing where they ask employees to make suggestions, right, innovative suggestions, but they have an idea committee, a representative of every department. They review them monthly, and if they think your idea has merit, they pull you out of your job for a number of weeks and give you a small amount of money. So they might say, Ben, that's a cool idea. Your teammates are going to cover you for 4 weeks. Here's $5,000. Prove the feasibility of this idea. So they have a metric, the number of employees that turned in ideas, the number of ideas that the idea committee liked, the number that they seeded and created an experiment to, and the number of those that became products. But I think it's a really, really great question, and I wish I had a better answer. We don't have good metrics for, is innovation working, or are we trying hard enough?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So does anyone have a follow-on question to that, or a separate question? I don't want to monopolize Jeff's time. I do, but for you, I don't want to. Any other questions from anyone else?
While you do that, I'll mention that that part of getting to that metric of innovation and process is when people do have some kind of brilliant idea, I always wonder the genesis of that idea. How did you come up with this idea? What were you doing? And where were you? And what exercises and motions did you go through that put you in that aha moment that created this idea? Right now, I'm sitting at Stanford University at President Obama's Global Entrepreneurship Summit. And I spent the last couple of days mentoring startups from about 100 countries. I love finding out that this is a really cool idea, but back up and tell me the steps you went through that led to the moment you came up with this idea. And my whole goal there, Ben, is to try to learn what are the best practices for innovation. What were these people that had great ideas doing that's similar that we might detect a pattern? People that had a great idea all seem to do these things. I don't know the answer yet, but it's a fascinating study.
So you're a Cleveland guy. I'm a Toronto guy. There's a hearty debate going on right now in Toronto about there was a company, a pretty prominent company up here that just moved to Silicon Valley for recruiting and customers. Now, I'm of the mind that one can not just have an idea, but also start and run an innovative and scale an innovative company from anywhere. What's been your experience around that? So you live in, so it's kind of two questions. The starting of the idea, better to be in Cleveland or Silicon Valley, and then the scaling of that idea into a company, a successful company. Can you do that from anywhere, or do you have to go to the Valley?
Sure. So I think that if you asked me that question just a few years ago, my answer might have been different. But what's happened in the interim, the answer is that you can do things from anywhere that you couldn't before. And I think the enabler of that is the democracy of information, being the internet. And let me give you a really fast example. I was in Senegal in West Africa. A 19-year-old West African kid said, "Mr. Hoffman, can I show you my idea?" I had just given a talk at Stanford the day before I flew there. I'm being honest, my expectations were low being in West Africa. This kid's idea was brilliant. I said, he works in the agricultural fields all day. I said, where on earth did you even learn those words here in the fields of West Africa? He said, Coursera. He said, I take free Stanford, MIT, and other courses at night on Coursera because I want a better life after I work in the fields all day. Then he started talking about operations for his idea and implementation. I said, okay, you didn't learn that in a classroom, so where'd you even learn that stuff? He said TEDx talks and TED Talks. He said, I watch TED Talks at night, and I was able to garner domain expertise from the world's leading experts on every topic on TED. Then he showed me his investor pitch. And I said, okay, you're busted. You did not come up with this pitch in a hut in West Africa. And he said, no, I didn't. He said, I spent time on SlideShare, and I found all the best investor pitches in the world. So this young man could not have existed in the past because he had no idea how to turn his idea into an actual solid presentation to garner support, and then how to launch a company. Today, with the democracy of information and with all these knowledge distribution tools, by the way, his company today, 350 employees, 7 African countries it does business in. We seed funded it, but huge organizations finance him now. So Silicon Valley is a great place. I'm sitting here today. We brought these people from all over the world here to learn some best practices, but we're learning from everywhere else simultaneously. You can create amazing all over the world now. The last part of your question, where do you need to be? I think you need to be right in the middle of wherever the problem you're solving is. So if you live in the problem and you know the environment and you know the customer and you know the market, you're a lot more efficient in a go-to-market strategy than someone who's never even been in that problem.
Very cool. Lucien, you had a question.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, Jeff. Really appreciate your thoughts here on that. Lucien Tarnowski, also based in San Francisco, and like to go deep on talent. And I often will compare, just to your point, Thomas Friedman's book, the Richard Florida's book, the Flight of the Creative Class, The Rise of the Creative Class. But Thomas Friedman saying the world is flat, Richard Florida saying the world is spiky, forms around hubs of talent. And I think Richard Florida would probably say that, your portfolio is the exception rather than the rule. Anyway, I had a question specifically around what I like to call founder market fit. Because I often think that for so many entrepreneurs, even though, the dots, as it were, might connect to the rearview mirror, there is almost a perfect background for what they do. Before, I often think before product market fit comes founder market fit, why that person's sum total of experiences beautifully prepares them to be solving their problem they're doing, to such an extent that you could argue they're actually best placed as an entrepreneur to go and solve the problem they're solving. I'd love your thoughts on that, because I think actually so many entrepreneurs will go out to the market to try and come up with their, whatever idea, whatever innovation they're going to do. And I actually personally think one of the, less traveled roads is going inside and doing a lot of self-reflection and a lot of self understanding and what makes me tick. My favorite entrepreneur quote is, "Dreams are not what I have in my sleep; they're what prevent me from sleeping." So there's this that inner fire, and I'd love your thoughts on this, because it seems to be different to the kind of mapping the market and externally.
That's a great question. I actually saw one the other day that said, it's not what happens when you're dreaming, it's what you do when you're awake, which I thought was kind of interesting, because everybody has dreams, but few people are willing to really do the work. So I think you brought up one of the biggest problems that we need to solve right now. I love that in the media, when people say, what is the one thing that startups, that entrepreneurs need most? Everybody always says funding. And I always say, are you kidding me? It's talent. I can find funding 1,000 times easier than I can find talent that can actually get this done. Talent, human capital is by far the scarcest resource. And you are correct. There are a limited number of hotbeds of talent in communities that breed it in a way. All the best ideas in the world go nowhere without somebody to execute them. In fact, written on my wall in my office, on the door before people come in, it says, ideas are welcome, but execution is worshipped. You know that phrase, because your idea is great, but if you can't execute it, this is just a fun conversation. So I started, I'll tell you, the last 3 years, I took off to study entrepreneurial ecosystems. And I think I probably visited 70, 80 countries personally in these last few years. And that the question you brought up, I've been going country by country to try to figure out the places that breed that kind of founder, the right type of founders, that kind of founder DNA and founder skill set and founder support for each other. What are the elements of an ecosystem that create that? I still don't know the answer, but I think you hit on a really, really important question. Because now, like I just told you, right here at GES, we brought in entrepreneurs from 104 countries with us. And the frustration from most of them is not funding. It's actually talent. I can't find co-founders. I can't find people to build this with me. And we, while it's nice when they come to Silicon Valley, I'll just tell you my personal mission is to help people help themselves, not for the US to do it for them. How do we create ecosystems that generate the type of founders that go out and succeed? So I do not know the answer to your question. I think it's an absolutely critical question because, again, I think that the scarcest resource is not funding, it's talent. It's connecting co-founders. Now, on the flip side, while I agree with you that there are limited communities that have the kind of founders and somehow seem to create them better than others, I also think that in this day and age, geography can only be used as an excuse, not a limit anymore. So our job, meaning the entrepreneurial community, is to build the online communities that connect people so that when you and I and Ben are talking, we're able to say, oh, that guy from Senegal that Jeff met, totally need to hook him up with Joseph in Sweden or whatever it is, right? We need to continue to build networks. So 2 tasks. One, we need to figure out what makes the best, what ecosystem makes the best founder generator communities, and do more of whatever that is, so that we're creating more founders that are capable of actually executing. But the other thing we need to do in the interim during that shortage is we need to find better ways to connect all these ecosystems and give people the tool set to say, here's me, here's the problem I'm solving, and here's the co-founder or team talent that I need. Can anybody connect me to that talent? That's the personal mission that I've been on recently. But absolutely great question, and I would love us to continue this conversation about how we create more co-founder communities.
So how do you do that if you're in a so go ahead, Lucian. Are you in a startup? If I remember correctly, you're in a startup as opposed to a big company, right?
Yeah. Funny enough, Jeff, when you said that, it's exactly what we do. I run a startup that powers online communities.
What's it called?
It's called bravenew.com. But I didn't mention it at the beginning, funny what we do, and then you kind of said what we really need is more online communities, because I sometimes describe it as like Back to the Future, that we in many ways, the pendulum of history swung too much towards individualism and away from community, and in many ways we need to go to these things called guilds that were much more peer-to-peer, that were system-led. And the guilds were ecosystems; they were entrepreneurial ecosystems.
Right.
And, it's not like we're having to invent this from scratch. We can, the landscape has changed, but the ecosystems have existed for many many centuries. But I think the opportunity, what you said about talent as the scarcest resource, I actually think that's the biggest opportunity. Is if you think, I often advocate that human capital is the world's most wasted resource. Therefore, the opportunity to use these communities to help bridge people's potential gap. And very different to the skills gap. The potential gap being the gap between what you do and what you could do if you were efficiently optimized and weren't, subjected to the failed education system and failed systems outside of that don't allow you to be efficiently participate in your own ecosystem. So I'd love your thoughts on, what ways this isn't just a question of entrepreneurship, but how can we scale this beyond the question of founders to this question of like, how can we help create ecosystems that do efficiently bridge people's potential gaps, the gap between what they do and what they could be doing.
So Ben, that cut out a little bit. I want to make sure I understand the question. Lucian, you were cutting out a little bit at the end, so let's just clarify the question.
Apologies. So I was saying, how do we go beyond the question and startups to more of a question of, if we accept that human capital is the world's most wasted resource and therefore there's huge opportunity, let's just put a number on it and say that 90% of the world's human capital is it being ineffectively utilized in the workforce. That means that we could do at least 10 times multiple if we could come up with more efficient measures to apply human capital. How do we go beyond founders, beyond entrepreneurs here? And I'd love your views on this in terms of how can we scale this challenge of, the same challenge of how do we really prepare founders and ecosystems? How can we go beyond that in the workforce? And obviously, helping develop entrepreneurial ecosystems is one part of it.
So again, I think that's a great question. And, I'll tell you what I've been pondering a lot lately, especially since I've been doing this world tour and talking to young people all over the planet to try to get a broader sense of where people are in the world. And here's the thing that amazes me. As we transition from sort of my generation to the millennial or whatever generation you want to call them, what I love is the one thing that irritates the crap out of millennials is calling them millennials. They don't want to be lumped into any group of any kind. But as I look at this next generation of talent, the transition, so it's amazing to me that the disconnect between my personal skills, not me personally, I just mean any individual. In fact, let me frame this another way. Here's what we got to figure out. We got to figure out how to get people to comprehend the one-to-one directly proportional relationship between the skills that you have and the life that you want to live. How do I apply my specific skills and talents to design and live the life that I want to live? And that's not where we are. Where we are is we're in this mode where, especially in America, take for example, where we have this great phrase called, thank God it's Friday. People say, thank God it's Friday, because 80% of our workforce actually hates their job, right? And we think of our work as the stuff I have to do to pay the bills to be a responsible adult. And if there's any time or money left over, then I can pursue my dreams and passions. And I think the next generation, the task is to say, let's find a direct alignment between my skills and talents, between my DNA and those dreams and passions and the life that I want to live. So we've got to get people to figure out, I think we'll increase efficiency. What you said is we can make the workforce more efficient. I think the key to that is when each individual understands that there is a way to use my specific talents, my specific skills, and connect them to my passions and my dreams and design a career path where I am actually working on stuff that I love working on so that my energy level, my commitment, and my output is dramatically higher. Because it's not, thank God it's Friday anymore. It's, geez, I wish it was Monday because I can't wait to get back to work because I'm working on stuff that fulfills me and I love doing it. It's taking me somewhere where I want to go. So I've been personally studying that transition. How do we get people, again, people pick careers, what they're optimizing is salary and title and growth through the corporation. They're not optimizing interests and passions and dreams and things like that. You should pick the meter for a career is not how much will I be paid, but how fulfilled will I be at the end of my life if I follow this path. And that's not the tool set that we have today. So I think the whole workforce gets more efficient when we start focusing on fulfillment as a multivariable equation of which compensation is only one variable. I ask people, I say, I want you to draw me an equation. I say, write for me the variables in your quality of life equation. Make a list of all the things that when you look back one day, you'll say, man, that was a great life. And it turns out salary and title are in the quality of life equation, but they're only one thing. So then I ask them, where do you spend your time? Which variables in this equation are you optimizing? Because at the end, the hope for every human being is you turn around, look backwards at your life and say, man, that was a great run. So we've got to figure out what the quality of life equation is, what the variables are, and how to optimize career and life planning in a way that get what people wind up getting way more energized and they can't wait to get to work instead of they have to go to work.
Very cool. So if I'm sort of to build on that question, so what if I'm one of these chief innovation officers at a very large company? I'm not sure quite how to measure whether I'm on track to doing anything. I really want to make a dent in the universe. What do I do? Do I hire McKinsey? Do I become better at storytelling? Like if I'm from a completely different place of origin and I have, for all intents and purposes, limitless resources and an incredibly low bar, let's say that 1 in 10 innovations, which is being generous, is successful. Do I just plug away at the sort of 1 in 10 success rate and hope for something that works? Or is there something else that I can do internally to kind of foster innovation for myself and my organization?
I'm going to be really brutally honest here. There are some companies where they're going to have to wait till all the old people die because they're never going to get it. They're never going to change. Interestingly, I was recently visiting startups in Israel, and I got to spend some time with Israeli President Shimon Peres. And I said, what's the best piece of advice you can give me? And Shimon said, you would think that if you want to change the world, you got to go talk to the people who run the world. And then he said, but you're wasting your time. It's too late for them. Focus on the youth and the next generation. So I don't want to take the negative tact. I'm just saying I visited companies where I visited leadership and they're never going to get it. But here's the good news. The good news is, like Lucian's company, there are a lot of companies out there. Aaron Hurst, Imperative, he wrote the book Purpose Generation. I'm just giving Imperative as an example. There are a lot of people coming up that are developing new tools and new metrics to help that limited resource, old paradigm management that you just talked about. There are more companies that are developing tools to assess the fulfillment level and happiness level of your employees and help you gear programs and gear job training and gear career design and job descriptions around that. So the future will not just be at the end of the year. I remember this when I was briefly an engineer at a big company. At the end of the year, I filled out a self-evaluation that was literally all one way. What did you do for this company, Jeff? That was the end of my whole year, was how many holes did I dig with the shovel they gave me for the company? And the new version of that will be somebody saying, did you grow? Do you feel like you've grown as a human? Tell me what things you've learned. How did you stretch yourself this year? Did you make any new relationships? Do you feel more fulfilled? Are you happier this year than last year? No company has ever asked me that. But going forward, there'll be more companies that will help us figure out what the formula is and make the relationship with the fact that there are managers today that say, Jeff, I pay the guy to dig holes. I don't really care if he's happy, right? That is way the old school. The smart companies realize the more energized I am, the faster I'll dig those holes anyway. If that's what you want me to do, get me excited about it. So I think there's hope because there's a whole new generation of companies that are going to provide us tools and resources for changing the way we motivate and inspire our talent internally.
But if I'm that executive, do I just have to wait and die and it's my kid who ends up doing it? Or do I, is there is McKinsey really, I don't want to pick on them, the strategy consulting kind of focused on the old way of doing things? What happens to that?
I think that companies that keep doing it the old way, well, let me answer the question really bluntly. What happens to that is companies that are still using an old paradigm will have zero access to talent, the best talent. The most talented people coming out of the market. Your job as a McKinsey or as McKinsey's client, to use your example, is to hire the most talented people on the market. Every year a new crop comes out. You will never have access to those people again. Because those people, when they have the option to go to a company that actually is designing a career path around their personal fulfillment instead of the old method of metrics, those people won't work for those companies ever again. So you can keep doing it your way, but you just won't get access to the talent. The talent's going to say, why would I ever subject myself to that? I'm going to work for a company that pays attention to sort of the new generation of talent requirement and talent needs. When I ask people now, when I hire people, I'll give you an example. The first question I ask is not, may I see your resume? And the first thing I do is not, let me tell you about the job description and the salary. The first thing I say is this. I say, tell me one thing that you have to achieve in your life so that when you look back, you will say that your life was a phenomenal success. Just tell me something that you want to achieve. And then when they tell me, I say, okay, my job as your employer, if you join our company, is to figure out how to help you achieve that. So why would I work at a company that says, as long as you do this work, I'll give you this paycheck? If I could work for a company that says, tell me what you need to accomplish with your life, and let's design a path where your career and with our organization will help you achieve that. I just think those people won't get that talent in the future.
That's awesome. Thanks, Jeff. So we have about 3 minutes left, and I was going to wrap up, but I'll just ask if anyone has a last question for Jeff before I do. Give you 2 seconds to unmute if you do. All right. So, Jeff, that was awesome. Thank you very, very much. I got a chance to ask a bunch of questions that have been burning within me, and I think that the discussion back and forth with Lucien was really valuable as well. It's very topical. I think that it's this topic affects a bunch of different topics. It's like, how do you create something? So thank you very much again, and thank you to everybody who participated. It's great. It's great that you can give your time, and as well, this will be recorded. Has been recorded, so I'll share it again so that we have access to this. But next up, we have David Nordfors, who popped in for a couple seconds at the beginning. And then following that, we'll have, what David's talking about actually is 5 billion customers want a good job, the untapped $100 trillion market for innovation for jobs. And then we have Bob Cohen with what's become an unorthodox perspective on AI. So the rise of software and networking-based economy, where the jobs come from. So instead of your jobs disappearing, it's what are the new jobs? And then in the spirit of education, we've been talking about it today, we have Daniel Pianko talking about disrupting colleges. So how can universities survive the 21st century? And then we have, and you may want to see this one, we have Steve Denning. I've been on him for a while. And Steve writes about a bunch of different topics, but I've talked him into talking about entrepreneurship. And his topic is why U.S. entrepreneurship is dying. So that's a different perspective. So I'm really looking forward to all of these, and hope to see everybody around again sometime soon. So thanks again, Jeff, and thanks everybody for participating.
Thank you very much.